welcome to the third event in our Women in Tech Republic Lunch and Learn series. For those of you that might be new to the event, it's the Third Republic employee-led effort that challenges the gender imbalance that exists among software engineers and other technical roles. Our mission is to connect, inspire and develop the careers of female technologists in order to make technology a more diverse and inclusive working environment. Today we're joined by Scrum Master at Planet Vash. We'll be talking about how we can make Agile work in a distributed team environment.
Thank you, Serena. Hi guys, this is Vaishnavi or Vash. I'm Vaishnavi Kulkarni. I work as a Scrum Master with Planet since last December. I work closely with a Scrum team which is pretty much matured in practicing Agile, practicing Scrum itself, but also I work as a consultant in terms of making processes better for other teams inside the organization. Overall, with around 4 years of my experience in this Agile world, I would say. So I'm finding it exciting to work and share my experience with you all, how we kind of did and implemented this practice of being Agile, doing Agile in terms of when we were co-located, and how things kind of got shifted when we all shifted from being able to see each other every day to actually shifted into the virtual space. So today our path is going to be, we mentioned about Agile and how we can keep the spirit of Agile in the distributed environment itself. So we try to understand the whole idea when somebody says we want to be Agile or we are in an Agile system, what does it mean? And then what does it mean to me personally, like how I see it, and the mind shifts that is required when we are kind of focusing on the topic of the transition itself. What does it mean to be able to see this change? And then how do we kind of introduce that change into the system? And then what do we focus on? What are the key factors that affects? And then we will slowly see the mind shifts that is required behind this whole transition process, be it any change that is introduced to the system, right? So this is the path that we are going to follow. To start with, what is Agile? Like when somebody says that they are doing Agile, we follow Scrum, we follow Kanban, or we want to transition to Agile, like we are following a traditional model and then we want to go into Agile, right? What does it mean when they say? And I'm sure most of you have experienced that this is something that comes to our mind at the very beginning, is the manifesto, the Agile manifestos. For people who are familiar with this kind of environment, is there are a set of principles that the Agile Manifesto upholds, which kind of drives all the necessary or all the practices that are attached to this system itself. And along with that, you might hear a lot of keywords like the team does stand up, and then, planning or retrospective, Scrum, Kanban, and the principles behind these things. There are a lot of keywords like, hey, we need to focus on communication. Hey, we need to focus on the teams being transparent, and so on and so forth. So we kind of see two different things here. The one is actually the principles and that drives these practices, and the practices itself, that is Scrum, Kanban, or basically doing the things that are driven by this value, right? So before we go into the topic of transition itself, as a Scrum Master, what I found interesting is to understand how we are connected as humans, like how we work internally, right? This is by science. We have this analogy, or like by science, we have this concept of the functioning of our brains, that is the left and the right. So the left is more to do with the logical tasks itself, and the right one is connected to the emotional well-being of the human, and the social aspect of it, right? So what exactly I mean when I say logical tasks? So every day we do certain things. We brush our teeth, we take a shower, we dress to go out. These are all like the practices that comes from certain principles or values, right? So these logical tasks that we do, be it internal, like team related, like doing the right things at the right time, these are driven by our left part of the brain. And then talking about emotional and social aspect itself, it's going to be the trust, the collaboration, and building this transparency, and creating this atmosphere where team feels safe, or as a human you feel safe to kind of adapt to this environment. So these are basically focusing on the values itself, right? So why is it necessary to talk about this? When we are talking about transition, why are we talking about science? You know, this is something that I felt the need, because when we were co-located, a lot of the right brain attributes, or like the emotional and social connect itself, came very subconsciously, because we were seeing our colleagues every day, day to day, water cooler chats, and then, you know, we hung out during lunch breaks. A lot of these emotional bonding or this connect happened subconsciously, without making much effort or creating a room to it. But we all faced this situation wherein we kind of had to move from being physically co-located into our own virtual environments. And that created a need to focus on the social aspect of it, which kind of was, you know, understood and then performed very naturally, that came very naturally when we were co-located, created need to build this channel specifically when we are virtually distributed, right? So that's the need of actually doing agile and then being agile. So there are two halves one can notice here if you're working in an agile environment. You notice that we do certain things driven by certain principles, certain practices, and it becomes very much important, especially during transitioning to virtual environment, that we focus on these principles, on the social aspects, and then adapt our practices according to these values and principles. The next one I would like to focus is actually the key mind shifts for these agile teams, right? Be it physically co-located, or we are practicing Scrum or Kanban or any other agile framework when we are virtually located in a team. What are the three mind shifts that affects, and what are the three mind shifts that one kind of has to consider when applying these practices, or how do we see those changes adapt very smoothly to the team, right? So the first one would be managing these changes through experiments itself. We will talk in detail about what I mean by change, what it is meant to do the change under the right circumstances, right conditions. And the second one would be to amplify communication and collaboration. We all talk about this aspect, right? Like, be it in our families, be it in teams, communication is the key aspect. And how do we see it when in a team when we are all remote? And of course, we spoke about principles, and that is something that I'm going to repeat again and again during this call, because that's like super important, and that is like the base layer on which everything else is built. Principle over practices. So let's focus on the change itself, right? What it means. Before going into the topics of transition, and then what kind of practices help us to do this better, it becomes important to understand what it means to introduce a change. I attended a seminar long back, and I had this, I heard about how we can represent our experiences working with change in a graphical model, and this would be, and I found it very interesting, and I thought I could share this with you all. So let's imagine a team, right? You're working in a team with certain kind of dynamics, you know your colleagues, you know your rhythm, you're all set, you know what to work, you know what to expect from the work. So you have a status quo maintained. Let's say change is introduced to the system. Now, you may ask, what does it mean that a change is introduced to the system? So the change could be anything, right? It could be a new member to the team. It could be a process. Let's say you decide to meet every day for 15 minutes instead of once in a week. So that itself is a change in the process that you decide to do. It could also be a change in leadership. You might say, if my leadership changes, how does it affect the team? But yes, it does affect the internal functioning of the team. It might change your roadmap. It might change your direction in which the team itself is heading towards, right? Or the change could be this tiny virus that the world saw a huge impact, which we kind of getting used to, or like fighting still till date. Yeah, the changes could be in any form. What it means as a leader who proposes this change, I see certain improvements that the team could make use of, and I'm very happy about it. And I think that this is the right practice, that if a team is able to take it forward, we would see an improvement, right? And I'm the person who is going to push this change. What is the expectation from a leader or a facilitator who is actually proposing this change or pushing this change is an upward graph, and then the team is having a new status quo, right? So there will be a learning curve. We are going to train them. We are going to tell them why it is what it is, and then we see the improvement or we see the results. Bam. Let's consider another perspective. It's the same team, it's the same change that is introduced, but this time it is imposed on you. So the same change in perspective of a developer or a team member who is receiving this change. Now, how does that matter? Like, what is it different? For me, the change is very overwhelming. probably the change is too big, probably the change is something that I have not anticipated. Usually the reaction would be that, I mean, this is too much to take in. We have a lot of other priorities. How many of us have not heard that, right? We will do this later, not now, and etc., etc., etc. So which naturally brings the graph down when it comes to getting the results out of the change or the practices that we intend to do as a result of the change. The third section is where what actually happens in general when the change is introduced under the right condition. Now, I want to underline this word under the right condition because this is the key for our transition when we move the state from one status to another. This is something that generally we come across in a team. When change is introduced, there is going to be an unlearning session. There is going to be a phase where team is going to push back certain things. There is going to be a phase where there will be a resistance and then a point of chaos, basically. And then slowly, one person, probably in a team is going to say, hey, I know how this can be done. We got the rhythm. And slowly, this is going to smoothen and then go upward slightly, and then they will have a new status quo, right? So this is the transition that every change is going to go through, or every team is going to go through when a change is introduced in any form whatsoever. So we spoke about change. We spoke about how it can be done under the right condition. So what does it mean to be done under the right condition? In my experience, what I've understood is every change to any system can be daunting, right? We in general are very happy to be things the way it is. We kind of feel comfortable. We don't want to shift anything. We are happy with how it's going. But when the change is introduced, how do we manage this change and why experimenting is important? So just talking briefly about it, taking small steps, right? This is one of the key factors that is surely going to help when we break down these improvement topics that we observe to be introduced into the system itself. Just to give you an example, let's say you're working with a team which is not so stable, and you're being called upon into the team to observe them, to help them make their processes better. And then you go into the system and you start making these observations. Okay, this is an area where they could improve. This is an area that we can take it a different perspective, and you make a 10 or 20 note of these improvements and how it is important now to introduce these change to the system, because we need the system to work towards making this right. And it becomes important to know how much of change that you can introduce into a system and what is a frequency. So this is just going back to this slide. So we now know that every change is going to take this curve, and to accommodate that, the best thing that gives the good results in terms of resistance, there will be more acceptance from the team if these changes are pushed into the system chunk by chunk. So just to give you an example, what we did for every retrospective meetings that we met with my team, we started collecting a backlog of all these small improvements at Planet, and this practice sort of helped us to exercise this principle, right? Exercise and see what value we can get. So we started observing that every 2 weeks, team had this freedom to pull one small improvement topic into their system and work on it. And also they are aware about all the 20 small improvements that are there in the backlog. So it is more flexible, it is team driven. So every time they pick small chunks of small improvements that they want to do, and your exercises iterated. So this is something that really worked as a practice for my team. And the idea behind it is taking small steps in introducing the change. Right, talking about breaking the norms. If you can do this along with me, or just see doing this, is a small exercise. When I was introduced to this magical world of Agile, I think like 7-8 years ago, my Agile coach had this small exercise, which till date is my favorite. So it's all about perspectives, right? So either one of your hands, lift it above, point any of the fingers, and then start slowly rotating clockwise, right? I am now rotating my hand clockwise. Above, I'm looking, it is still clockwise. And now, slowly I bring my hand down. I still look at my finger, and then I'm looking from above to my hand, rotating. And suddenly, it's not clockwise anymore. It's anti-clockwise. People who did this exercise with me, you can confirm that you see the same thing as I see. Nothing changed, right? We started moving clockwise, and we didn't change our hand direction. We just started coming down. But what was once clockwise is now anti-clockwise. And what changed is the perspective, right? So this is my favorite activity that I do when I'm talking to a team, when I want to introduce something, is to see certain challenges, to see certain areas of improvement topics in a different perspective. So when I say breaking the norms, this just to give you an example. So when we moved from being physical to a distributed environment, it kind of pushed all of us to, of course, work through Zoom or any other collaborative tools that we have in the market today. For all our meetings, we suddenly stopped using camera. We suddenly didn't feel comfortable in switching on our cameras and talking to each other. And we are the same team who saw each other every day. And then later I understood that there are certain norms attached to when we are working in an office environment, right? Like probably it could be that we need not to be in pajamas. And then we are expected to have certain kind of working atmosphere around us, not to have our pets jumping in, not to have our kids paying guest appearances, right? So this is something that many of us wanted to avoid, and this forced us to switch off the cameras. As I said, perspectives, right? How did we try to look at in a different way is modern problems require modern solutions, right? So what I did, I tried this experiment with my team. I tried to switch on my camera irrespective of others, the cameras switching off, totally respecting their views, and then making it okay to be in casual clothes, making it okay once in a while to take call from kitchen, from garden, from balcony or anything, or making it okay if a pet jumps in and then we talk about the pet, or making it more and more okay, more and more giving this space of freedom and trust. I could see that people kind of started slowly switching the camera on when they're talking, and then again switching it off. But it did work, maybe not overnight, but slowly as the time passed. And this is the experiment that I'm talking, that you observe certain things and try it with a new perspective, but then keep on experimenting with it to build this safe environment among the team. And this showed me good results. So that is what I mean, like breaking norms and changing, trying, experimenting with your teams. And the next one is my personal favorite, is the game sense approach, right? What does game sense approach mean? Is when a change is introduced into the system, my personal favorite is to ease into the change itself by more fun and interactive way, and games are a great tool to do that, right? So for example, we could have, usually what I do with my team is also kind of categorize it. We have like a team building games. We all kind of make use of it, for example, as an icebreaker or as a small activity before kicking into the technical details or technical meeting itself. So just these are my favorites, which do not take too much of preparation, but yet kind of slide into the mood and then make everybody comfortable being around each other. So these could be used as a small team bonding activity or like icebreakers in a virtual world as well. Is Two Truth and a Lie. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but this is a super nice activity to play with when somebody new joins in. And it's a great thing just to share at Planet for any new onboardees. We have these questions, and I feel it really kind of lightens the mood before and to know a person when they're joining in. So it could be a great conversational piece when you're talking to the person and trying to bond. And then the baby picture game. This game has brought like a lot of laughter, and I'm sure you play with family, friends, or team. This is going to create a lot of energy within the team. Is to guess their childhood photos. And as a facilitator, you don't need much preparation to it. You just have to collect all these baby pics and then, start showing it up one by one. And the team all goes into about it. And it creates a very good energy at the starting of meeting, or it's a small icebreaker as well. And the third one is very famous when we all moved to the virtual world, is taking a picture of our working desk and again guessing who's who, because we all see through cameras and we kind of have a mental picture of who is working in which environment or atmosphere, right? This also creates a very good healthy start. But there are some team buildings that requires certain preparation, and these are like, it could be escape rooms or pub quizzes, which I personally feel it's worth the preparation, because it kind of is a very good health check once in a while to do this with a team. It really creates team bonding, and also we kind of, especially in the escape room, we kind of know whose strength is what, and it brings in the sense of team and unity among the team. So these are my favorites when it comes to team building itself. And then there are other sections that when I try to create, I try to strategize when I want to introduce a change through something fun, through something different, is data driven. So what I mean by data driven is, as a team leader or a scrum master or an agile coach, you're working with team on a day-to-day basis, and you make certain observations, right? These observations lead to collecting certain data. And when you want to introduce a certain practices or an idea into the system, we can choose to design a model which is not too formal but yet conveys the same message. So this is one of my favorite approach, especially when we are sitting apart, especially when the focus and the attention span is very difficult to retain for a long time, is to make it more fun and an interactive way. So just to give you an example, this is when my team was finding very difficult to understand the whole concept around estimation, what it means to analyze the tasks, what it means to break down these tasks and understand how we can fit these tasks into a limited time period. So we kind of did this activity, which involved the entire team who is participating, and we tried to map it with the sizes of the animals, right? So the small tasks, the team tried to map it with ant or medium to rabbit, and so on and so forth. So this was a team activity which kind of made them, during this whole course, realize where goes what, and also why it's important to break these into a right chunk so that it doesn't become too overwhelming when they are working, and what is the value that we are trying to achieve out of it, right? So these are extremely customized activity that one could do based on the observation and based on the data that they collect after working with the team itself. And this is my favorite, and this is recent one, which I'm very happy about, because I don't know how many of your Friends series fan. So we did this activity in one of the retrospection. So why we did this activity, like why I thought of coming up with something non-traditional retrospective questions, like what went well, what did we do, what we could improve, is also because based on my observation, I collected data that we kind of ended up discussing very similar topics every time we met with the team. What went well? Yeah, okay. What went wrong? Cool. And then the action points that were coming out of these meetings were very similar every time, right? So which kind of made me think, hey, how about thinking in a different way, like bringing a different perspective to this? So why did I think is because of the data that I had, and based on your interaction with the team, you feel comfortable to perform or like introduce certain small activity, which again focuses on the same values, but gives it a different perspective. So this is what it was. So it's a famous quiz episode in the Friends series, and instead of the questions from the series itself, we had certain questions which could trigger answers that are helpful to make these small improvements. For example, what's the new thing that you tried last, and what action would you take to make sprint better by 1%? Like what would you want to see, or what would you want to stop doing certain things? And this is my favorite. if you could make a 20-second phone call to yourself at any point in the sprint, when would you call and what would you say? So these kind of open-ended fun questions going to raise and create this environment of fun, which definitely the output was totally different, and we didn't anticipate those, we didn't get those output when we did the traditional way of doing it. And when we slightly shifted the perspective, we kind of started getting all these topics out which never came out, and that was a great success, right? So yeah, so these are my favorite approaches. One is the normal team building, fun to do, keep the health check of the team, and then the second one would be data driven itself, by creating an activity, by observing, collecting data, and then formulating it. But what exactly is important in all these things is keeping this experimental loop on. So whatever we do, we have to kind of experiment, and then you have to collect the results, receive feedback, and then learn from those feedback. So this is extremely important, in my opinion, when we are working with teams and when we are trying to find better processes that improve their health, right? And then, which is, this is my favorite, because sometimes we get excited. I have experienced this, that it is important to experiment with the team and not on them. So it is important to experiment, as in it is important to involve the team. It is important to get everybody on board on the idea of why we are doing what we are doing, and then it's going to be smooth, and it's going to be easier for us to work on it and then learn from this. So as just going back, the Friends quiz experiment that I was talking about, it did work really well with one team, and it didn't deliver, or the results that were expected to come out of this activity was not as expected with another team, which makes absolute sense, because the other team was set in a different way. The processes that they were doing was totally different from the team A, and the team B had absolutely different set of expectations. Hence, it becomes important also to observe each team in a different lens, and then customize based on their need and based on their maturity level and based on how deep are they into following certain practices. Yeah, these are the things that I personally take care of when I'm working closely with teams in terms of guidance, process guidance, and etc. We are almost coming to the end of these topics, because we spoke about change, experimenting with change, and how it is important to make sure that we introduce into the system, how easily we introduce into the system, and that easily the transition is going to go. We also spoke about certain small games and team building activities that are my favorite, and that has resulted in some value. The next topic in terms of mind shift is focusing on team affiliation. So why team affiliation becomes much important is subconsciously we kind of, as I mentioned earlier, that we are not in the same location. So it becomes important to build this kind of trust and build this kind of constant talking, replicate the water cooler chat and lunch unions, everything in the virtual space, right? So these are some of the examples, or the key tip I would say is during the transition phase is continue talking because that's super important. We have a number of online tools that we have right now: Slack, Office, Google Chat, whatever your team or the system is using. But the important thing to know is that we need to kind of build this channel and facilitate and enable people to keep this ball rolling. Building a buddy system. So this is something that I was talking earlier, that what happens subconsciously, right? You see somebody on a day-to-day life in your office, and you kind of bond with that person subconsciously, and that we need to replicate into the virtual world. As an example, one thing what we do at Planet is to have this buddy system where every person has their buddy, they are tied up, where you could do all sort of activities which are not necessarily technical or team related or work related, but more bonding on a human interaction level. Talk about a film, chat about your weekend, or share your stress levels at work. So basically building this buddy system even in the virtual environment explicitly has showed that we have very good system to fall back, and you don't feel isolated, and you just don't feel that you're no more connected. So building this connect really helped, and this is something that I would continue to do. Last but not the least would be involve everyone in decision making. This goes without saying that when you're a team of 5 or 10, right? So it's still small enough that any major decisions or even small decisions, including having a meeting somewhere, meeting outside the office, sometimes now since the corona restrictions have slowly gone down, it's still possible. So keeping everybody involved in this decision making gives them power to feel that they are important, and it gives them that kind of confidence and safety net that building the sense of unity, right? So involving everyone in decision making, being transparent about the topics is definitely something that helped, and I would keep doing it in terms of virtual world itself. Well, overall, we spoke about a lot of practices, a lot of principles, changes that I would see in the virtual environment. And for me, the tip of the iceberg, as you see here, is principles and then building the practices over it. So whether you're working together, whether it is on Zoom, whether it is somewhere else, on the virtual world, it is important to adapt. And how we adapt is based on the principles that are underlying. We still focus on empathy, we still focus on trust, we still focus on building this sense of safety and being transparent, right? So these are the kind of principles that I would build my practices over. So anything that you see on top should have a good connect to the principles itself, right? Before we close and wrap it up, I would like to mention that there are many collaborative tools out there to replicate the sticky boards, sticky notes that we used to use when we were co-located. I personally use InVision, Mural, and all these online tools that you see. And this gives a great platform to kind of ask everybody to join in and work together and somehow replicate the co-located atmosphere. A tool is only as good as its user, right? So we make use of the tools in a right way, and we enable team to use these tools in the same way, right? And thanks for listening to me patiently so far. And I give it over to Serena.
Thank you for today. Super interesting. I did actually get a few questions come throughout the talk. So we got one asking, you highlighted 3 key mind shifts for Agile teams. Which is the hardest mind shift to implement?
I think I wouldn't say like hardest. Everything is equally hardest to implement, but I think the tricky ones where we could mostly find difficulty in implementing would be actually implementing this change itself, because we need to, as I mentioned, kind of formulate and strategize certain activities around these principles. So we need to be able to do that right. So if not, then we might delay this change, or we might have a different resistance from the team. So doing this right, or at least going one step closer to do this right, I think that becomes very tricky sometimes, depending on the the change itself. Whether it is leadership driven, or what is the effect that the change is bringing, right? If it is something big, then I think it becomes necessary to understand fully and then formulate a plan and then hit the road.
When managing change, what is the first step that leaders should take? So is it taking small steps, breaking the norms, or should they do all these things at once?
I think the first step would be, as I said, understanding what this change is intended to, like what is the impact that this change is going to bring. So the impact is something that we need to understand, and then breaking it into smaller steps is something that a leader can do on their own, or with a group of people in the leadership, and then work with the team step by step to introduce this change. So breaking the norms and then introducing those changes itself goes hand in hand, but checking the impact of the change and also breaking these change into smaller can first go in terms of leadership, and then when we actually put this across to the team, we could also work with the team how they see we can take this change forward.
And we did get one last question. In your opinion, do you think that creating and working in an Agile environment will be harder in a completely remote environment or in a hybrid workplace? Do the methods for creating an Agile environment change if you're working for the hybrid environment?
It's a good question, actually. I would say that we surely need to adapt when it's hybrid. So when I say remote, when everybody is remote, everybody is still logging in from their personal machine. When you say hybrid, the equation changes, right? There could be 3 people joining from a meeting room and then 2 people from their individual machines. So as I said, it comes again down to the values. We need to make sure during this hybrid situation that we do not sidetrack the person who are joining from their individual homes, because it somehow tends to create this environment where people who are working together, joining from the meeting room, have a better understanding, or they kind of discuss among each other and inform the other 2 who are joining away. So it does become important to adapt to the distributed environment and make sure that we still keep everybody involved equally, be it physically located or distributed. And usually what we advise or we suggest also, even though if it is distributed, everybody join from their individual laptops to replicate this remote environment, and nobody feels that there is a gap between the conversation and decision making.
Thanks a lot, Vash, for today. Super helpful. It's really nice to get everyone together every so often for lunch and learn.